A character witnesses the birth festival of Aldra, proclaimed king of the world, and can only watch in silence as that moment marks the beginning of the revolution. Surrounded by a crowd celebrating in frenzy, a figure burned in flames while the helpless observer could do nothing but watch the horrifying scene unfold before their eyes. The scene shifts to a memory, 10 years in the past, on a night when fire consumed everything, as armed figures stood witness to the destruction that would forever mark those who survived it. That same night, kneeling and crying out for his sister, the young man made a vow, a promise forged in grief and desperation that would shape the course of his life from that moment forward. Through tears, two voices called out to each other, Rai and R.A., two people desperately reaching for one another in the midst of chaos and loss. The story shifts to the present, revealing the vast and rugged landscape of Matthew's Great Canyon, where birds soar freely between the towering rocky cliffs. Within the canyon, a cloaked and armed figure stood over what appeared to be bodies on the ground. His eyes hardened with resolve as he declared internally that he would never forgive those responsible. A hand gripped a bottle, and a cold, humorless laugh escaped, the kind that carried no joy, only bitterness and dark resolve. A horse-drawn carriage made its way through the canyon, guided by a coachman steering the two horses along the rocky path. Two men laughed inside the carriage, celebrating the kidnapping of a child for a hefty reward. One of the men was suddenly startled, alerting the other. A dark, cloaked figure landed swiftly in front of the carriage, blocking its path. One of the men smirked unfazed at the cloaked figure standing in their way. Ordered to be run over, the cloaked figure stood firm and sliced through the ground, stopping the carriage with a single strike. The sudden stop threw the men inside the carriage into chaos, leaving them shaken and crying out in pain. The kidnapped child, shaken by the impact, cursed in frustration. One of the kidnappers drew his blade and confronted the cloaked figure, demanding to know his identity. The cloaked figure unleashed a powerful attack, completely destroying the carriage and sending everyone flying. The cloaked figure stood tall amidst the dust and debris, calm and imposing. The armored figure accused the kidnappers of taking the Earl's son and coldly demanded the boy be handed over, warning that any resistance would be met with no mercy. The rescued child recognized him as his big brother. The kidnappers refused and charged at him together. He swiftly overpowered them, though he had no desire to kill needlessly. One kidnapper lunged at him with a killing blow, forcing his hand. He cut them down without hesitation. One of the surviving kidnappers, stunned by the black armor and overwhelming strength, began to suspect who he was facing, leaving him no choice but to act. Among all the Holy Knights, only 8 had ever been granted the title of Heretic Hunter. The kidnapper recognized him in terror. He was a Purge Knight. The knight coldly asked what his next move would be. The kidnapper stumbled back in fear as the knight loomed over him, threatening to send him to join his fallen comrades in the afterlife. Confused and desperate, the kidnapper questioned whether a Purge Knight's duty wasn't to hunt down the reincarnated, wondering what was really going on. The knight dismissed his questions and gave a final warning: leave or die. The kidnapper fled in a panic. The knight turned to the bound child and asked if he was the Marquis's son. The boy could only grunt in response, and the knight acknowledged it simply. The knight confirmed there was no mistake this time. The bound child was the reincarnation Misumi Nagamasa and coldly sentenced them to death. Blade raised, the knight declared that the reincarnated must die. Never again would he allow what happened that night to occur. The scene shifts to a lively town street, where locals gossiped about something that had happened the day before. The townspeople laughed as word spread that some bandits had been killed in the Matthew's Great Canyon. The gruesome details unsettled the locals, with rumors that the bandits' heads had been snapped clean off, making some consider avoiding that road for a while. A cheerful girl named Celia was scolded for bringing up such gruesome stories first thing in the morning. A young man listened quietly, acknowledging that traveling merchants always faced danger on the roads. Celia smiled warmly, saying she just hoped everyone, including Rai, would come back safe and sound, as the morning buzzed with its usual liveliness. Celia was surprised as Rai himself appeared, greeting her with a calm good morning. Celia noted he was off to work early again, as the Holy Church's clerical work had been keeping him busy lately, and gently reminded him not to push himself too hard. The surrounding locals teased them, with some joking they were already drunk and others playfully demanding an invitation to their wedding. Celia's mother burst in, gushing that someone as handsome as Rai was wasted on her daughter, leaving Rai to simply agree under his breath. Watching the warm scene around him, Rai hardened his resolve. He wanted to protect their happiness, and he would. The scene shifts to the second city of the Saint Labao's kingdom, Bennett Netka. Rai entered a building, announcing his presence politely. Rai greeted Bishop Curtis, who returned the greeting warmly. Bishop Curtis brought up the previous day's mission involving the reincarnation Misumi Nagamasa, acknowledging it must have been difficult. Rai informed him that by the time they found the Marquis's son, he had already passed away, and that those suffering the most were his parents. Rai reflected on the cruelty of it, for parents to discover that their beloved son was a reincarnation. The bishop solemnly agreed. Then Rai stated he had come for his next assignment, to which the bishop hesitated before responding. The bishop explained the new target, a dragon, the monstrous remains of a failed reincarnation. The bishop revealed that one of the Inquisition's research specimens had died, and 2 purge knights had already been sent to secure a replacement. Rai remarked dryly on the considerable effort involved. Rai was ordered to stay on standby at headquarters, as the other purge knights had already been deployed to capture a dragon sighted at a lake in the south. The bishop added that he had a different task in mind for Rai. 2 fierce warriors clashed in intense combat training, exchanging swift and aggressive strikes. Rai approached and introduced himself as a knight from a neighboring kingdom on temporary assignment, then challenged one of the warriors to a duel. One of the warriors admitted she had been feeling down since arriving, stuck with chores, and had decided to slack off a bit. The bishop had sent Rai to meet Rai's Howl, an aspiring purge knight renowned for her exceptional abilities. Delighted to face a holy knight at the training grounds, she declared she would give it her all. Rai asked for his name, but Rai smirked and told her she would only find out if she could defeat him. Rai charged at him, remarking that he was quite confident. Rai agreed that the duty of a purge knight was a heavy burden, and stated he had no desire to recruit unnecessarily nor to increase the fatality rate of the profession any further. The bishop asked if Rai would take charge of her training should she prove worthy. Meanwhile, Rai fought relentlessly but grew frustrated as none of her attacks were working against him. Rai overpowered Rai and called an end to the duel, warning she would get injured if they continued. Rai, catching her breath, told him she had sworn an oath to become a purge knight, and when asked why, she simply repeated that she had sworn it. Bruised but unbroken, Rai smiled and insisted she could still fight. Her resolve triggered a flashback. 10 years ago, on the night the Aldra Rebellion began, the reincarnation Aldra had rallied a revolutionary army and sparked uprisings everywhere, destroying many villages in the chaos. As a child, Rai had watched helplessly as her neighboring village burned and lives were lost. That was why she swore to become a purge knight someday. And back in the present, she declared she would not lose. Rai took in her words, then casually knocked her down, remarking that her own village had been spared. The ground suddenly exploded as a dragon burst through, shocking everyone and sending Rai flying with a scream. As others urged retreat, Rai stopped Rai and told her that if she wanted to become a purge knight, she couldn't make a fuss over something like a dragon. Rai charged at the dragon without hesitation, leaving Rai trembling and wondering who he really was. Rai fought the dragon with ease, smiling as he overpowered it effortlessly. The dragon was defeated, crashing down with a tremendous impact as dust and debris scattered everywhere. Standing over the fallen dragon, Rai revealed his own oath from that same night, to protect the happiness of the people in this world from the reincarnated and to never forgive them. Rai stared at him in awe, asking once more who he was. He finally revealed his identity. Purge Knight Rai Cornwell, ranked 7th and titled the most excellent knight, telling Rise he looked forward to seeing her reach his level. Elsewhere, a determined voice declared that today they would corner him for sure. A cloaked figure was cornered in an alley, but as pursuers closed in from all sides, someone shouted to look up. There was still a way out above. The pursuers recognized the cornered figure as a reincarnation and urgently called for it to be reported to the Holy Church immediately. Chapter 2 begins at the Holy Church headquarters, where someone eagerly shares a piece of news. Rai struggled to follow what was being said, while a mysterious, smiling figure remarked that the human tongue enjoys unevenly mixed flavors more than perfectly blended ones. The mysterious figure leaned in close and declared affectionately that Rai was her favorite. Rai impatiently asked her to get to the point. The woman, revealed to be the blind Saint Stella, pouted and called him a killjoy before relenting. Stella got to the point. Purge Night, Rai Cornwell's next task was to eliminate a reincarnation. Stella revealed that the reincarnation's true name was Adachi Haruka. Stella explained that a thief had recently been causing a stir in the royal capital by targeting noble estates, and was even sending out warning letters, all likely the doing of Adachi. Rai noted there was even a rumor spreading among the capital's guards that Adachi could vanish right before their eyes and reappear very far away. Stella remarked that it was quite a strange magic trick as Rai set out on his mission. Rai pondered quietly. Could be a supernatural ability? Stella confirmed it. The reincarnated possessed powers to cause non-human phenomena, such as controlling fire, flying, or reading minds. In Adachi's case, the ability was likely spatial teleportation. Rai noted that there had never been any reports of an ability quite like Adachi's before. Stella was surprised when Rai was already preparing to leave, calling out to him as he departed. Donning his black armor, Rai excused himself with cold resolve. The reincarnation had to be eliminated as soon as possible. Stella watched him go, musing to herself that he truly was beautiful and unevenly colored. Stella smiled cryptically, wondering what would happen when Rai finally realized his true self, and saying she looked forward to it. Rai was briefed on the mission. Despite knowing a heist was coming, Adachi was a reincarnation and had to be dealt with. The target was a ruby stored at the Earl's residence on the southern edge of the city, with the next crime set to occur in 3 days, as stated in the warning letter. Rai's caught up to Rai, but he told her he couldn't join her for training that day. With spatial teleportation in play, he couldn't let Adachi out of his sight for even a moment. Rise asked if he was going after the reincarnation and eagerly wanted to know if she could come along. Rai cut her off mid-sentence with a swift strike, asking bluntly if what she meant to say was that she wanted him to take her along. Looming over a shaken Rai warned her with cold seriousness. Never underestimate the reincarnated. Rai told her to go back, but Rai stood her ground, insisting she was not underestimating them. She understood firsthand just how terrifying reincarnations could be. Rise cried out with raw emotion, confessing that she could never forgive herself for her own powerlessness, nor could she forgive what had been done. Her face was twisted with anguish, every word torn from a place of deep, unresolved pain. Rai coldly told her to stay out of his way, but Rise's resolve only burned brighter. She declared that if she remained weak, she would never be able to forgive herself, the weight of her past failures driving her forward with desperate determination. Guards were positioned throughout the room as someone declared that today was the day they would finally catch the Phantom Thief. Rise stood determined among the guards, declaring with certainty that this time they would catch the Phantom Thief. Rai watched in silence, his sharp eyes betraying nothing. Before anyone could react, a hand phased through the display case. Adachi's ability, spatial teleportation, already in motion. Adachi seized the ruby and slipped past everyone in an instant, declaring victory before anyone could stop them. Adachi screamed as someone ordered everyone to rush to the rooftop immediately. The guard spotted Adachi and immediately opened fire with arrows, but Adachi evaded the volley. Adachi laughed triumphantly, mocking how effortlessly the whole heist had gone. Rai appeared in an instant, blade drawn, coldly announcing himself to Adachi as Purge Knight Rai Cornwell, and that he was coming for them. Adachi teleported away in a flash, narrowly escaping Rai's strike. Adachi reappeared defiantly, warning Rai to stay out of the way. Adachi teleported repeatedly, unleashing a rapid flurry of attacks against Rai from every direction. Rai snatched the ruby right out of Adachi's grasp, leaving him stunned and bewildered by his overwhelming speed and composure. Rai drew his blade with cold precision, ready to end it. Cornered and desperate, Adachi barely managed to block Rai's strike as he coldly declared it was over. Adachi teleported away once more, slipping out of Rai's reach at the last second. Rai watched in shock as Adachi teleported away, only to spot them reappearing on a nearby tower. Rai rushed over asking about Adachi, only to find Rai calmly holding the recovered gem. He had already let Adachi escape, ordering Rai to keep watch in the area. Rai leapt into the night, silently pursuing Adachi alone. Rai stood still, clicking her tongue as she finally grasped the true nature of Adachi's ability: spatial teleportation. Wounded and retreating, Adachi swore they would not forget this. Rai watched Adachi escape, coldly acknowledging that catching someone with teleportation was no simple task. Rai stood in silence, slowly realizing that what he had witnessed was not teleportation at all. Rai read Adachi's message, an invitation to meet at dusk by the fountain in Hazan Memorial Park, along with a taunt to come retrieve the stolen loot in person. He noted dryly that the previous night's heist had ultimately failed. Newsboys shouted in the streets, announcing an extra edition. Someone crumpled the newspaper in frustration upon reading that the Holy Knights had foiled the heist. Adachi arrived at Hazan Memorial Park, waiting by the fountain as the wind blew through the quiet surroundings. Rai stood nearby, skeptical that a simple flyer would be enough to draw Adachi out. Rai reasoned that Adachi's pride would not allow her to accept the humiliation of a failed heist. She would definitely come to reclaim what was taken. Adachi appeared and was immediately intercepted by guards, but brushed them off dismissively, having no patience for such minor obstacles. Adachi laughed and leapt into the fountain, mocking the guards as they flailed helplessly around her. Rai struck without warning, sending Adachi flying with a single devastating blow. Adachi grinned fiercely, welcoming Rai's arrival with provocative excitement. Rai closed in instantly, unleashing a relentless barrage of strikes against Adachi. Adachi teleported frantically, trading blows with Rai in a fierce and chaotic exchange as rain poured down around them. Adachi landed at a distance, frustrated and forced to admit that Rai was overwhelmingly strong, with absolutely no openings to exploit. Adachi smirked defiantly, declaring that Rai had no idea of the power she wielded, while Rai replied coldly that she still didn't understand. A third figure joined the battle, launching a fierce surprise attack against Rai alongside Adachi. Rai was momentarily staggered, and the new attacker seized the opening, lunging in for the kill. Rai recovered instantly, swiftly overpowering both attackers and sending them crashing to the ground. Adachi cried out the fallen fighter's name, Anna, rushing to her side as the other lay wounded on the ground. Rai exposed the truth. Adachi's real ability was invisibility, and the two had been working as a decoy team all along. Adachi pleaded their innocence. They had only stolen out of desperation to care for her sister, never harming anyone. Rai dismissed it coldly, stating he was not killing them for their crimes, but simply because they were reincarnations. Rai stepped forward, calling out to Rai and ordering him to step away from the sisters. A third sister emerged, holding Rai's hostage and threatening to kill her. Rai noted coldly, not 2, but 3. The third sister revealed a shocking truth. She had reincarnated as Rai's second personality. On the very day, he lost everything to the Aldra. She revealed she had always been there, silently witnessing every moment of Rai's life from within. She whispered that now, once again, history was repeating itself. Rai unleashed a devastating surge of power, while her voice echoed from within. helpless to do anything but watch. The ground erupted as Rai's attack tore through everything, sending debris flying. Yet Adachi managed to flee carrying her injured sister. The third sister transformed into a fearsome dragon, declaring it her trump card. Rise broke free and caught her breath, desperately searching for a way to get close to Rai through the chaos. Rise screamed a warning. The dragon was coming from above. Rai met the dragon's assault head-on, clashing with it in a thunderous impact. Rai was struck down hard, and the voice within screamed desperately for him to get up and run while Rise cried out his name in panic. The dragon's sister mocked the anticlimactic ending, but the voice within Rai erupted in refusal. Rai still had so much left to do, and she would not let him die here. Rise threw herself into the fight, landing a fierce strike to buy Rai time. The inner voice stirred in shock. She had just moved using Rai's body. Rai snapped back to consciousness, wide-eyed and bewildered as the dragon loomed over him. The inner voice apologized and took control of Rai's body, evading the dragon's attack, though the dragon dismissed it as a fluke. The dragon laughed and launched a devastating attack, vowing to crush them this time. The dragon gloated mid-sentence, then froze in confusion as Rai remained standing. The dragon looked around in disbelief. Rai had vanished completely. Rai reappeared in an instant, slicing through the dragon with a single decisive strike. Rai noted calmly that the dragon's legs couldn't be cut, while the dragon thrashed furiously, screaming at him to hold still. Rai smirked, reasoning it shouldn't be difficult. He would simply aim for the weak spot common to most animals, the neck. Rai's eyes shifted. The inner voice had taken over, activating her own ability, mind reading. The dragon watched in surprise as Rai dashed with bursts of energy, but remained confident. After its rampage, there was nowhere left for him to run. The dragon smashed the ground repeatedly, confident it only needed to play whack-a-mole. Even if Rai could dodge the blade, he couldn't escape forever. The inner voice smiled. Using mind reading, she already knew every attack coming next, and the dragon had no idea. The dragon froze in shock. Rai had predicted its attack perfectly. The dragon panicked, losing track of Rai completely as he slipped beneath it, leaving the beast frantically searching for where he would strike next. Rai launched himself upward as the dragon took flight, hurling his blade straight at its neck. Rai pinned the dragon down and declared it was over, calling the third sister by her true name, Sasaki Kazuma. Kazuma found herself completely immobilized, resigned to having fulfilled her role. The inner voice relinquished control, urging Rai forward. Rai snapped back to full consciousness, his eyes wide and alert. Rai drove his blade into the dragon's neck, and Kazuma let out a piercing shriek of agony. Kazuma screamed in disbelief as she was struck down. Kazuma raged in her dying moments, cursing Rai for getting in her way. She had reincarnated hoping to finally live freely in this world. Kazuma felt her strength draining away with her blood, powerless to stop it. Rai declared coldly that the people of this world were not mere objects to fulfill her desires, to which Kazuma could only ask if that wasn't obvious. Rai roared with fierce conviction. This world belonged to its people and to them alone. Kazuma collapsed and crumbled, her dragon form disintegrating as Adachi rushed desperately to her side. Two observers watched in awe, remarking that Rai had truly outdone himself, flawless in both resolve and strength. They declared he had passed the Purge Night test with a perfect score. The scene shifted to the Holy Church headquarters, grand and imposing under the open sky. A figure called out, stopping Rai in his tracks and asking if it was really him. Rai smiled warmly, greeting the man as his master after a long time apart. His master noted he looked thinner, and Rai admitted he had lost a little weight. Rai froze in confusion as his master casually removed his helmet, leaving him speechless. His master leaned in gravely, asking Rai directly, was he truly sure about this path he was walking? Rai answered without hesitation. Yes, he had chosen the path of a Purge Night, and he had no regrets. Rai thanked his master sincerely, crediting him for how far he had come, and declared that now it was his turn to become the shield that protects the weak. Rai's master acknowledged what he had said and accepted it without further argument. Without another word, Rai's master drew his blade and launched a swift attack, wishing Rai a happy 14th birthday in the same breath. Rai could only murmur his master's name, caught off guard by the sudden strike. In the midst of the sparring, the master paused and apologized, admitting he never meant to cause Rai any sadness. Even so, the master confessed that he himself had never been able to find any path other than that of a purge knight. The scene shifted to a town street, where a cloaked figure noted that the wound received during the confrontation with Adachi Haruka had fully healed. Rai straightened himself and acknowledged that he could not afford to keep resting indefinitely. Nearby, a cheerful woman proudly admired a dish she had just finished preparing, while Rai stood quietly in the background, wondering to himself how his master was doing. The woman was startled to see Rai and greeted him with surprise. He calmly requested one of the dishes, and she cheerfully agreed to serve it alongside soup for breakfast, already pondering different filling options to make it even better. Eating his meal, Rai confirmed he would be returning to work that day, feeling the need to make up for the time he had lost while recovering. Visibly moved, Rai quietly thanked Celia. Yet even as he accepted her warmth, something weighed on him. His hands tightened as an unspoken but lingered in his mind. Outside, Bishop Curtis was waiting for Rai and greeted him as he arrived. Rai returned the greeting, while his thoughts dwelled on the weight of his duty. Reincarnators were formidable, and a single mistake could cost him his life. He knew he needed to grow stronger. Rai asked if there were new orders for him. Curtis apologized for the sudden request, but asked him to head to Stella's location right away, adding that she was in the garden as usual. Curtis informed Rai that Stella had received an oracle that morning. A reincarnator had appeared. Rai found Stella seated in the garden, surrounded by blooming roses, where she asked him whether he happened to know anything about the Chaos Cult. Rai described it as a cult filled with wicked believers who worshiped the god of truth and chaos, a deity banished in ancient myths. He had also heard that they venerated the reincarnated as divine messengers of their god. Stella revealed that the reincarnators had apparently appeared at the cult's hideout this time, and saw it as a perfect opportunity. She ordered Rai to crush the cult while he was at it. Rai accepted the order, but noted that the mission might be too much to handle alone, and requested another person to accompany him. Stella agreed, though she pointed out that the cult members had no special abilities to speak of. Stella smiled and reassured him that bringing a partner had been the plan all along. After all, there were a grand total of 7 reincarnators this time. The revelation left Rai visibly stunned. At that moment, Rai's master appeared, remarking that Rai had arrived with perfect timing and greeting him warmly. Rai could only murmur his master's name in disbelief. Stella called out Rai's name, and his master stood firmly beside him as she formally addressed them both, Purge Knights Rai Cornwell and Aslan Aldebaran. Stella entrusted both of them with the task of eliminating the reincarnators. Chapter 4 opened with a brief exchange between two figures, one questioning whether the other had truly found Savior, to which came a simple, quiet confirmation. The figure quietly reflected that the reason they were still alive was because of the encounter with that person on that fateful day. The scene shifted to a flashback, 10 years prior, in the wake of the chaos left behind by Aldra's uprisings, as a lone figure surveyed the devastation spread across the land below. A knight searched the ruins for survivors, grimly noting the senseless cruelty of the destruction. A young boy knelt among the ruins, crying out for his mother and his big sister. The boy was revealed to be Rai, just 7 years old at the time. The knight found the boy and offered a quiet apology. The knight lamented that he had not arrived sooner, as young Rai looked up at him. Overcome with grief and rage, young Rai struck the knight and screamed out in anguish. His cry echoed across the sky. Why had it come to this? The boy broke down, demanding to know why the knight hadn't come to save them. The knight held the sobbing boy and apologized sincerely, as a caption noted that the damage left in the aftermath of the chaos had been devastating. For villages in the northern region had vanished from the map entirely, and one major city was on the verge of the same fate. The ruins stretched in silence, crumbled walls, and scattered debris all that remained. The knight lamented his own powerlessness, but young Rai firmly told him it was not his fault. Rai trailed off, the unspoken weight of if only heavy on his lips. Memories of his family flashed through his mind as Rai broke down. Had he only been stronger, he could have protected them. He refused to remain powerless. The knight resolved that if nothing was done, the boy would carry his guilt forever, and so he had to save him, no matter what. The knight introduced himself, Aslan Aldebaran, the fourth strongest knight in the country, and a purge knight ranked fourth. Aslan offered to take Rai under his wing and train him, leaving the boy stunned. Rai asked in disbelief whether he could truly become stronger, and Aslan assured him without hesitation. Overwhelmed, Rai broke down in tears. Aslan told the boy that if he was ready to follow him, he should state his name. Through his tears, the boy declared his name, Rai Cornwell. Back in the present, the sound of training echoed through the surroundings. From that day on, Rai began training under his master. Young Rai pushed through grueling training, breathing hard as he ran through the forest. Both Rai and another figure trained side by side, breathing heavily from the exertion. Rai was struck down during sparring, crying out as he hit the ground. Aslan looked down at him, unmoved, and asked if he was tired already. Struggling to his feet, Rai asked Aslan to teach him how to use a sword. Aslan dismissed the request flatly, telling Rai he hadn't even reached the level required for swordsmanship yet, leaving Rai to cry out in frustration. Despite the hardship, Rai refused to give up, pushing himself forward with fierce determination. Aslan laid out the fundamentals: a strong body, sharp observation, good judgment, knowledge, and experience. He told Rai to start by running that route every morning, much to the boy's dismay. Rai reflected that his life with his master had revolved entirely around training. It was grueling, but even so, he smiled at the memory. Aslan praised Rai for memorizing his letters, noting his remarkable growth, then directed him to his seat for the next lesson. Rai reflected that he had gained far more than just physical strength, so the hardship never felt like agony. Rai recalled all that Aslan had taught him: reading and writing, human anatomy, for swordsmanship, and much more. Aslan explained that the male god of truth and chaos had been banished to another world for his destructive acts. Yet even now, he continued to send those under his protection to interfere in their world. Aslan gravely explained that these people were the heretics who had to be purged, the reincarnated. Rai's expression hardened as he recognized them. They were the ones who had destroyed his family and village. His enemies. Aslan paused briefly, then quietly continued the lesson without a word. Aslan watched as Rai dozed off from exhaustion, quietly noting that despite the grueling tasks he had given him, the boy was holding up well. Aslan recognized that revenge was what drove the boy forward, and quietly wondered whether he would ever be able to give Rai the happiness of living, free from that burden. The flashback jumped forward. Rai, now 13 years old, trained with fierce intensity. Rai sparred fiercely against multiple opponents, holding his own with a fierce grin. Rai spotted an opening in his opponent's swing and seized the moment, while Aslan watched and accused him of slacking. Rai landed a clean strike and declared his victory, as Aslan watched on with quiet satisfaction. But before he could celebrate, a counterattack caught him off guard, sending him reeling. Aslan acknowledged that Rai had defended well, but declared it wasn't over yet, pressing the attack further. Standing before a vast landscape, Rai quietly reflected that he had been feeling stronger than ever lately. Rai declared with a bright smile that he would definitely become a purge knight, just like his master. Aslan called his name softly in response. Aslan's expression darkened as he warned Rai not to strive to become like him. He explained that every purge knight must walk the path of Azura, cutting down every reincarnation without exception, even children. It was, he said, an agonizing path to follow. Rai looked at him steadily and told his master he was wrong. Rai declared firmly that it was a sin for reincarnations to be born into this world in the first place. Aslan fell silent, struck by the boy's words. Aslan wrestled with doubt. His unrelenting hatred toward the reincarnated burned like an inferno. The flame ignited that night had never gone out, and yet he questioned whether he had any right to stop Rai, when he himself had been unable to save him as a child. Rai noticed his master's distant expression and asked if something was wrong. Brushing off the question, Aslan told Rai about the Holy Knight recruitment examination. He could take it once he turned 15 and should aim to pass. They would talk after that. Aslan called an end to the day's training and reminded Rai to take care of his equipment. Rai called out to him as he walked away. As he tended to his equipment, Rai reflected that in 2 more years he would turn 15 and hoped that by then his master would allow him to become a purge knight. Meanwhile, Aslan was approached by someone who recognized Rai as the child he had taken in. Aslan stood in silence, resolving to himself that he could not allow Rai to walk the same path of Azura that he had, no matter how much the boy wished to become a purge knight like him. Stella appeared before Aslan and asked warmly how the boy was doing. Stella remarked that Aslan was personally training Rai in swordsmanship and delighted in the idea that he would surely grow up strong. She expressed her wish to have Rai as her personal purge knight, and sensing he was no longer needed in the conversation, Aslan excused himself. Aslan froze in disbelief as Stella announced she had made an exception. She had decided to allow Rai Cornwell to take the purge knight examination early. Aslan pleaded with Stella to revoke the decision, insisting the boy should not be brought into that world. But Stella stood firm. She wanted Rai to take the exam and find his right place. Aslan shot back in disbelief, questioning whether she truly believed being a purge knight was the right place for him. Aslan erupted in fury. The boy had already been through hell, and despite that, Stella was willing to let a 13-year-old walk the path of Azura. Stella's tone shifted, addressing Aslan firmly by his title. Stella told him plainly that he was mistaken, as a vision of young Rai training relentlessly flashed alongside her words. Stella smiled cryptically, declaring that her dear Rai had already been on that path for a very long time. Meanwhile, unaware of the conversation taking place about his fate, young Rai continued training alone in the forest. Chapter 5 opened before the Holy Church headquarters, where Rai Cornwell was officially summoned and told he would now undergo a trial, described by the chapter title as the trial of a peerless warrior who hunts heretics, the Purge Knight. Kazuma declared that this world was his fresh start, free from the people and society that had tormented him before. This time, he would live on his own terms, with no one to boss him around or mock him. Kazuma declared that with his ability, he would take whatever he wanted and erase anything that dared stand in his way. Kazuma unleashed his creatures and dared Rai to come at him. Rai met his gaze without flinching and declared coldly that he would kill him. Rai charged straight through the swarm of creatures, and before Kazuma could react, he had vanished completely, leaving him stunned. Rai reappeared in an instant, striking Kazuma with a swift and decisive blow. Rai's expression was cold and unreadable as the strike landed. Kazuma cursed and summoned more creatures to cover him, buying himself distance as the battle intensified. Rai cut through the summoned creatures relentlessly, carving his way forward without slowing down. Kazuma reeled from the assault, stunned and struggling to comprehend how Rai was cutting through everything so effortlessly. Rai tore through Kazuma's defenses with blinding speed, leaving him wounded and desperate. His speed was simply beyond anything Kazuma could counter. Kazuma braced himself, admitting reluctantly that he had truly not wanted to resort to this power. Kazuma called his creatures back with a single command, absorbing them into himself as his power began to surge. Rai watched in disbelief as Kazuma's power exploded outward, transforming into something far beyond what he had faced before. The shockwave reached Leon and Alfonso, leaving them alarmed by the sudden surge of power. Leon cursed under her breath, fearing that Rai might not be able to handle this alone. Alfonso suggested they should intervene, but Leon cut him off, telling him to go check on Rai while she held her ground. Rai steadied himself, piecing it together. So this was a reincarnator's true ability. Kazuma's transformation was complete. A massive, nightmarish form towered over Rai, its sheer scale dwarfing everything around it. A voice revealed a shocking truth. It had reincarnated as Rai's second personality, on the very day he lost everything to the Aldra. The voice confessed it had always been there, silently witnessing every moment of Rai's life. And now, once again, history was repeating itself. As Kazuma's monstrous form unleashed its power, the inner voice cried out in anguish, helpless to do anything but watch. Kazuma's attack tore through everything, sending debris flying in all directions, and Rai was struck down hard, crashing to the ground. Kazuma loomed over the destruction with dark pride, declaring that what Rai had just witnessed was his trump card, his cheat. Kazuma let out a thunderous roar, his monstrous form radiating overwhelming and unchecked power. Rai lay on the ground, battered and struggling to rise as Kazuma's shadow loomed over him. Breathless and battered, Rai pushed himself to think. He needed to find a way to close the distance. Before he could act, a voice screamed a desperate warning from nearby, above him. Leon arrived just in time, throwing herself into the attack and deflecting Kazuma's strike away from Rai. The inner voice screamed desperately for Rai to get up and run, while Leon called out his name from above. Rai forced himself to his feet, pushing through the pain with sheer determination. Rai cried out in pain, his body badly wounded, as the inner voice screamed his name in desperation. The inner voice erupted with fierce refusal. Rai still had so much left to do, and she would not let him die in a place like this. Kazuma sneered, disappointed by what he saw as an anticlimactic ending, but the inner voice erupted in fierce refusal. Leon threw herself into the fight, landing a fierce strike against Kazuma to buy Rai the time he desperately needed. The inner voice stirred in shock. She had just moved using Rai's body. Rai snapped back to consciousness, wide-eyed and disoriented, but tightened his grip and steadied himself, ready to press forward. The inner voice apologized quietly as she took control, borrowing Rai's body for just a little while longer. Kazuma dismissed it as nothing more than a fluke, refusing to believe what he had just witnessed. Kazuma brought his full force down, vowing to crush Rai completely this time. Kazuma laughed triumphantly, mocking Rai for not even being able to stand, then froze mid-sentence, caught off guard by something he didn't expect. Rai had vanished completely, leaving Kazuma frantically searching the rubble, unable to find a trace of him. Rai reappeared in a flash, slicing through Kazuma's legs with a swift and precise strike. Rai noted calmly that Kazuma's legs couldn't be cut, while Kazuma thrashed furiously, screaming at him to hold still. Rai smirked. It shouldn't be hard. He would simply aim for the weak spot common to most animals, the neck. Rai's eyes shifted. The inner voice had taken over, activating her own ability, mind reading. Kazuma watched with grudging acknowledgement as Rai dashed with bursts of energy, but remained confident. After his rampage, there was nowhere left for him to run. Kazuma smashed the ground repeatedly, confident it only needed to play whack-a-mole. Even if Rai could dodge the blade, he couldn't escape forever. The inner voice smiled. Using mind reading, she already knew every attack coming next. Kazuma had no idea that his every move was being read in advance. Kazuma froze in shock. Rai had predicted his attack perfectly, leaving him completely bewildered. Kazuma panicked, losing track of Rai completely as he slipped beneath him, frantically searching for where he would strike next. Rai launched himself upward as Kazuma took flight, hurling his blade straight at the exposed neck above him. Rai pinned Kazuma down and declared it was over, calling him by his true name one final time. Kazuma found himself completely immobilized, resigned to having fulfilled his role. The inner voice relinquished control, urging Rai forward with one final push. Rai snapped back to full consciousness, his eyes wide and alert. Rai drove his blade into Kazuma's neck with decisive force, drawing a piercing shriek of agony as the strike landed. Kazuma screamed in disbelief as he was struck down. It was impossible. Kazuma raged in his dying moments, cursing Rai for getting in his way. He had reincarnated hoping to finally live freely in this world. But his strength was draining away with his blood, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Rai declared coldly that the people of this world were not mere objects to fulfill Kazuma's desires, to which Kazuma could only ask if that wasn't obvious. Rai roared with fierce conviction. This world belonged to its people, and to them alone. Kazuma collapsed and crumbled, his monstrous form disintegrating as his strength finally gave out entirely. Two figures exchanged a brief, waiting moment, one giving a simple confirmation while the other marveled with quiet disbelief at what Rai had just accomplished. The two observers officially declared that Rai had passed the Purge Night examination with a perfect score, acknowledging that he had proven himself flawless in both resolve and strength. The scene shifted to the Holy Church headquarters, its grand architecture standing imposingly beneath the open sky. A familiar figure called out, stopping Rai in his tracks and asking if it was really him. Rai smiled warmly, greeting the man as his master after a long time apart. His master noted he looked thinner, and Rai admitted he had lost a little weight. Rai froze in confusion as his master casually ruffled his hair, leaving him completely speechless. His master's expression grew grave as he leaned in, asking Rai directly and with quiet weight whether he was truly sure about the path he had chosen. Rai answered without hesitation. Yes, he had chosen the path of a Purge Night, and he had no regrets. His master took in his words quietly and accepted them without further argument. Without another word, his master drew his blade and launched a swift attack, wishing Rai a happy 14th birthday in the same breath, leaving Rai caught off guard, able only to murmur his master's name. In the midst of the sparring, the master paused and apologized, admitting he never meant to cause Rai any sadness. Even so, the master confessed that he himself had never been able to find any path other than that of a Purge Night. The scene shifted to a town street, where a cloaked Rai noted that the wound received during the confrontation with Adachi Haruka had fully healed, and acknowledged that he could not afford to keep resting indefinitely. Nearby, a cheerful woman proudly admired a dish she had just finished preparing, while Rai stood quietly in the background, wondering to himself how his master was doing. The woman was startled to see Rai and greeted him warmly. He calmly requested one of the dishes, and she cheerfully agreed to serve it alongside soup for breakfast, already pondering different filling options to make it even better. Rai confirmed he would return to work that day over breakfast, while the woman admitted she never quite understood his job, but asked him to stay safe regardless, as both she and her mother truly cared about him. Visibly moved, Rai quietly thanked Celia. Yet even as he accepted her warmth, something weighed on him. His hands tightened as an unspoken but lingered in his mind. Outside, Bishop Curtis was waiting for Rai and greeted him warmly. Rai returned the greeting, his thoughts dwelling on the weight of his duty. Reincarnators were formidable, and a single mistake could cost him his life. He knew he needed to grow stronger. Rai asked if there were new orders for him. Curtis apologized for the sudden request, but directed him to Stella's location in the garden right away, informing him that she had received an oracle that morning. A reincarnator had appeared. Rai found Stella seated in the garden, surrounded by blooming roses, as she asked whether he happened to know anything about the Chaos Cult. Rai described it as a cult of wicked believers who worshipped the god of truth and chaos, a deity banished in ancient myths, and noted that they also venerated the reincarnated as divine messengers of their god. Stella revealed that the reincarnators had appeared at the cult's hideout and saw it as a perfect opportunity, ordering Rai to crush the cult while he was at it. Rai accepted the order, but noted the mission might be too much to handle alone, requesting a partner. Stella agreed, pointing out that the cult members had no special abilities. Stella smiled and reassured him that bringing a partner had been the plan all along. After all, there were a grand total of 7 reincarnators this time, leaving Rai visibly stunned. At that moment, Rai's master appeared, remarking that Rai had arrived with perfect timing. Rai could only murmur his master's name in disbelief. Stella called out Rai's name as his master stood firmly beside him. Stella formally addressed them both, Purge Knights, Rai Cornwell and Aslan Aldebaran. Stella entrusted both of them with the task of eliminating the reincarnators.